was a man of great warmth and compassion and of principle.
He was just a wonderful individual, absolutely gregarious, easy to strike up a conversation with, and he was full of life.
My name is Lydia Shelley, and I'm the current President of the New South Wales Council for Civil Liberties. It's my pleasure to introduce this short documentary about Kep Enderby, one of our founding members who formed the Council along with his fellow activist friends in 1963 as a means to maintain, defend and strengthen civil liberties in New South Wales. Kep's deep commitment to democracy and justice paved his way towards being appointed the Attorney General in the Whitlam Government, where he introduced a bill that ultimately became Australia's first Racial Discrimination Act. Everyone watching stands on the shoulders of people like Kep, who committed themselves and their advocacy towards securing a more just, a more democratic country for everyone. I'd also like to thank everybody that's been part of this project in preserving Kep's legacy. It allows a very important opportunity for all of us to consider our own capacity and role in strengthening, maintaining and defending civil liberties in New South Wales and in Australia.
Well, firstly, the Racial Discrimination Act was foundational human rights legislation for Australia. But more importantly, it wasn't just symbolic, it absolutely transformed the country. Because prior to that legislation, it was essentially perfectly legal to discriminate against our fellow Australians on the basis of race.
So 50 years ago, Kep Enderby and the Whitlam Government conceived of a framework, a Racial Discrimination Act, created for the purpose of a greater, more socially inclusive country. And the ideas behind that is that everyone who is a part of this nation, every Australian, should feel like they're an equal member. And that race in particular shouldn't be a determinant in creating inequality.
The Racial Discrimination Act was just one of the first things of its kind in Australia. For the first time, being racist was a criminal offence and people had protection against the sort of awful conduct that I saw growing up as a kid in the 1970s and 80s. You could do something about it because the Racial Discrimination Act for the first time said this is wrong.
To my surprise, I've been a lawyer for nearly 16 years. In that time, I've spent quite a bit of time in that social justice world. When I realised that there is actually no centre thinking about race and racism, and I just kind of thought the only reason that would happen is what I know to be this idea that there is no more racism. I also know that not to be true, that there are systemic issues to be dealt with and there needs to be a movement and a collective of people doing some deep thinking about how to move the issue.
Yeah, well, the Whitlam Government was an amazing chapter in Australian history. What was so wonderful about it was they systematically set about bringing Australia up to the same standard as the rest of the world, in things like women's rights, protection against racial discrimination, and implementing the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights.
Without the Racial Discrimination Act, there would ultimately have been no successful Mabo decision, and there's no doubt in my mind that the states and territories, or a number of them, would have sought to wipe out Aboriginal native title rights recognised by the High Court. So it was that important.
I've been doing this work in cross-cultural consulting for over 25 years. And I would say that overall, there have been gains in multicultural communities achieving more equity. However, the losses or the deficits that they continue to experience are still a great concern.
The Racial Discrimination Act matters to the New South Wales Council for Civil Liberties because it's one of the core things that the Council's campaigned for. It's all about preserving, protecting and promoting basic human rights, and the freedom from racism is one of those. It's a core aspect of what the Council stands for and has always fought for.
Although the Racial Discrimination Act has been profound in its impact on Australian life. What it can't do is deliver social justice to First Nations people in this country. We've got to empower Aboriginal people, and we've got to provide long-term funding in all the critical areas, not this stop-start funding. We need a cross-party commitment that will lock the nation into delivering on that agenda.
The Racial Discrimination Act has helped ensure that there's been a line drawn in the sand around some very bad behaviour. And I wouldn't just say behaviour, but systemic discrimination, to state it more correctly. But the overall feeling has been is that it's not enough. The idea that we are all born equal, we're not there. This is the time to do something. It's probably not more urgent than this moment right now.
While I was president of CCEL, I was really fortunate because Kep was around. I used to come to the odd committee meeting. I'd see him every year at the annual dinner. He was just so positive, usually about Esperanto, trying to convince everybody in the room about the importance of having a universal world language and how easy it'd be.
When he'd almost reached his 10 years on the Supreme Court, he used to say to me, I'm being entitled to the pension soon, I don't know if I should retire or not. I used to say to him, go and retire, you get a bit bored of it, don't you? He'd say, I don't know what I'll do if I retire. I said, look, you're a bloke with wide interests, though things will find you, you might as well. He finally did, and he did a lot of things. He became chair of the Serious Offenders Review Board in the Corrective Services portfolio. He took over the presidency of Dying with Dignity. He was always an exponent of Esperanto, which is an artificial cobbled together language, which he found very useful when travelling, particularly in Europe. He'd just link up with the local Esperanto society, no trouble about having a language they could all speak, go out to dinner with them, they're all politically progressive. But after he retired, he became the president of the World Esperanto Association.
Any important civil rights issue, you could always turn to Kep for sound advice about how to campaign and how to pursue it.
Well, I knew Kep had been a very good golfer. If you're old enough, you might recall the posters that were promoting Tooth's KB Lager that were often displayed outside hotels in the 1950s and 60s and into the 70s. And I was told that the golfer was Kep. I asked him about that. He said, yeah, that's right. I took a photograph of me. I think Kep was regarded as having the classic perfect swing, although they didn't use Kep's head. They got a model's head instead of Kep's head, and they probably would have kept Kep's head if he'd been promoting rugby league, but not golf. He was New South Wales amateur golfing champion, aged 20, I think. And it was about the time he was finishing his law. And he was in a Pro-Am golf tournament somewhere, and he was having a beer on the 19th hole with Norman von Nider, who was then the top Australian professional golfer. He was thinking of going pro. And von Nider said, well, what are your alternatives? He said, I'm just finishing law. He said, oh mate, he talked him out of it. He said, look, you're a smart bloke, you've got a good career ahead of you. You should go for that. And Kep took the advice, and he became Attorney General of Australia and a Supreme Court judge. But he added, I sometimes wonder